When the war started in September of 1939, while German divisions crushed borders, there was a force that didn't go to the front, but was always where control most needed to be imposed. They wore black and followed the troops, not to fight, but to ensure that every order of the regime was carried out precisely. They weren't trench soldiers. They made sure everything kept working in the occupied territories, from moving prisoners to executing orders that ended with thousands dead. They appeared all over the occupied continent, regardless of whether it was in the Balkans, the East, the North, or the West. They kept the system running, making everything stay the same, even when there was no longer a front. But in May of 1945, when everything collapsed, a huge number of them managed to leave. Some blended with civilians, others crossed borders, many fled south, and a few remained alive decades later without anyone touching them. What is shown here is what they did and how they ended up. But if so many escaped, who were the ones who really wore that uniform? The SS, from shock group to extermination machine. It all began with a handful of armed men who only knew how to follow orders. In 1923, amidst the political chaos in Germany, about 20 men swore to protect Hitler wherever he went. They were his personal escort. They called themselves the Protection Squad, and all they did was beat anyone who interfered with him. They were few, dressed conspicuously, and sought fear more than respect. After the failed coup attempt in Munich, Hitler was imprisoned. But when he was released in 1925, he revived his club of thugs. He gave them a more serious name, the SS, and transformed them into an elite force at the service of the party. They were not many at first, but Himmler took charge of their growth. He had a different way of working. He didn't shout, he didn't show off. He planned in silence. While the SA was noisy and brutal, the SS gained ground unnoticed by many. Himmler organized everything internally, and in a short time he managed to make Hitler trust them more. In 1934, they used an alleged betrayal by the SA chief to wipe them out in the Night of the Long Knives. It was a brutal internal purge. With that, the SS was given a green light to act without restraint. Himmler was not an imposing figure. He looked more like a boring civil servant. But he was meticulous, obsessive, and cold. He didn't need to raise his voice to control everything. He had an obsession with racial purity and order. Under his command, the SS ceased to be a simple armed group and became a cog in a system of total control. They controlled everything from the secret police to the concentration camps. By his side was Heydrich, more ambitious and aggressive. He set up the espionage and surveillance offices. He knew how to read between the lines what Hitler wanted. This is how he devised the plan for the final solution. He didn't need direct instructions. He already understood what was expected of him. He was fast, efficient, lethal. The Gestapo, the most feared arm of the system, was smaller than people thought. It functioned because thousands of ordinary citizens denounced their neighbors. They informed for nothing in return, only out of fear or fanaticism. Thus, the SS didn't need large structures. It had half the country monitoring the other half. Heydrich organized everything to exterminate millions without it appearing to be an internal scandal. He died in 1942, but he left the blueprint ready for others to follow precisely. He left behind methods, lists, and trained personnel. Without him, many things would have taken longer. With him, the process accelerated. By then, the SS was no longer a single entity. It had branches. There were administrators, intelligence personnel, those who managed the camps, and those who fought on the front. The Waffen-SS, its armed branch, presented itself as a parallel army. They claimed to be normal soldiers, but they participated in massacres, looting and repression like any other criminal group. Himmler remained in command. He interfered in everything. He insisted on detailed reports. He wanted to know how many prisoners entered and how many left each camp, how many trains arrived, how many bullets were used. He even thought about that. For him, everything was logistics. In the camps, guards received specific training. They knew what they were doing. They were not improvising. Those who worked in the crematories, those who led the victims, those who guarded, all were part of the same circuit. They had manuals, routines, and clear orders. They could not claim ignorance. The Totenkopf units with the skull insignia were the ones who managed the harshest camps. They were the ones who directly carried out executions. They received training for this. They did not hide what they did. They were proud. In the offices, the bureaucrats were also SS. They kept records of everything: transport, stolen property, redistribution of goods. While some killed, others wrote. Everyone contributed to the machine. Loyalty to Hitler was the only rule. Obedience was not questioned. Any member of the SS was expected to act without hesitation. If they hesitated, they were out. Many knew this. Not all were sadistic, but all were functional. The system was designed so that no thinking was required. When the Allies began to gain ground, the Nazi leaders started looking for ways out. Himmler, who had been the most loyal, tried to negotiate in secret. He wanted to save himself. He spoke with foreign diplomats and sought contacts. But he was discovered. Hitler removed him from his position. He went from being the second most powerful man in the regime to a despised traitor. In the last months of the war, the camps were evacuated. Many prisoners died in forced marches. Others were killed before the enemy armies arrived. Files were erased and evidence was burned. Those responsible tried to disappear. Thousands of SS escaped. They changed their names, disguised themselves as civilians, and mixed among refugees. Some used fake papers, others took refuge in convents, and others crossed borders. Some were caught quickly, others lived for decades without anyone bothering them. After the surrender at the Nuremberg trials, the SS was declared a criminal organization. Not only the leaders were judged. It was made clear that belonging to that group was participating in a collective crime. There were no innocents within. Even so, many managed to avoid punishment. They changed countries, identities, and professions. Some even held public office elsewhere. They lived as if nothing had happened. They had families, businesses, and recognition. Only many years later were some discovered, but not all. And so it remained. A structure that began as a personal guard transformed into a machine of repression, surveillance, and death. And when everything fell, many of its members simply disappeared into the crowd. Klaus Barbie, the butcher who kept on killing. When the war ended, Klaus Barbie was not arrested or prosecuted. He was taken off the radar with new documents and moved between Allied zones. He was handled by United States intelligence offices, which had already flagged him as useful for operations against communist groups. They incorporated him into their networks without raising suspicion. From 1947, he began to pass on reports, give names, and identify contacts. While France sought him for what he did in Lyon in the United States, he was protected like a treasure. In 1951, with the help of German priests and secret routes in Italy, he crossed the border without arousing suspicion. From Genoa, he boarded a ship that took him to South America. He ended up in Bolivia, with another name, another life, another story. Klaus Altmann, businessman. In a short time, he had documents, businesses, and friends in uniform. He remained in the background until the military governments called upon him. He taught them how to repress, organized operations for them, and passed on the know-how of terror. By the 1960s, he was indispensable. He lived well without hiding. He came and went, moved money, and managed meetings, always under the same facade. The Klarsfelds identified him in 1972. Photos, evidence, papers. They requested his extradition to France. Bolivia played dumb, saying that type didn't exist, but he remained there, giving orders, engaging in dirty politics. In 1980, he helped with Garcia Meza's coup. He was at the center of everything. He trained troops, devised strategies, and drafted reports. The man still held power, but in 1983, things changed. The new government agreed to release him. France pressured, and he was put directly on a plane. He was sent without trial. He arrived imprisoned. He was put in a cell and the cases were opened. Victims, documents, and witnesses appeared. People remembered everything. Dates, places, screams, trains. The orders bore his signature. Every movement was registered. Mothers, children, and survivors testified, describing everything in detail. The trial lasted weeks. Every piece of evidence was shown. The defense tried to stop the process with technicalities, but the judges didn't buy it. In July of 1987, he was sentenced. Guilty of crimes against humanity, life imprisonment without appeal. From there, he went to the hospital prison. He lasted 4 years. In 1991, he died alone, under guard, without a funeral. Aribert Heim, the doctor who vanished. In 1941, he was placed in Mauthausen with the title of doctor, but what he did was not medicine. He moved around in a white coat with syringes ready and asked 0 questions. He tested chemicals, opened bodies without anesthetizing anyone, noted reactions, times, and symptoms. He didn't use names. He only read numbers and ordered the next one to come in. Whoever entered did not leave. He was 27 years old, had studied in Vienna, joined the SS and was sent there. He asked for no permission for anything. He had free rein. He experimented with anyone. Jews, Roma, political prisoners. He was methodical, quiet, precise. When the Soviet front approached, he was moved to Reich hospitals. Mauthausen closed. Papers were burned, but some remembered him. His name kept circulating. At the end of the war, American troops captured him. They arrested him. He used his real name and they released him. No one had recognized him. He went to Baden-Baden, opened a clinic, treated the rich, prescribed vitamins, and appeared in newspapers. In the 1950s, he was a gynecologist with a house, car, and comfortable life. But in the 1960s, the survivors began to speak. They identified him. The police went for him. He was already gone. He sold the car, emptied his account, and vanished. He took a ship from Marseille and landed in Cairo, with a fake passport and a new name, Tarek Hussein Farid. He claimed to be Muslim, went to the mosque and read the Quran. He moved around a lot, didn't write letters, and didn't use the phone. He lived in hiding, ate on the street, and changed houses frequently. Initially, he sold items brought from Europe. Then he connected with ex-Nazis who were in Egypt. They had a network, contacts, and helped him. His son sent him money from Germany, using false names. He lived like this for decades, without photos, without visitors. If anyone asked, he said he was a refugee. He never admitted who he was. If recognized, he disappeared again. Germany continued to search for him. His face was on posters. There was a reward, but no one found him. Egypt did not cooperate. Sometimes they used these fugitives as advisors, not Haim. He kept his distance. He gave consultations for food. In the 1980s, he began to get sick. His stomach hurt. He went to the hospital under another name. He had cancer. He didn't return. He self-medicated. He ended up collapsing on the street. He was taken to a public hospital. He died there. They said he was Egyptian. He was buried under his false name. No one notified Germany. Only a couple knew the truth. In 2009, a journalist connected the dots. He found witnesses, documents, and photos. Medical data was cross-referenced. It matched. The tomb was there. German justice confirmed. Haim died in 1992 in Cairo. He was never judged. No one touched him. He spent more than 40 years as a fugitive, hidden in alleyways under another name, but with the same past. Josef Mengele, the one who crossed 3 countries without being touched. At the very end, Josef Mengele abandoned Auschwitz. He still wore his uniform and blended in with the retreating German troops. He reached Western Germany and hid, using his real name. He was held in several Allied prisoner camps, one of which was in Gmunden. He wasn't recognized and was released as if he were any other private soldier. He didn't have to answer for anything. He spent a few months on farms, working for food. He changed locations frequently. In 1949, with the help of old contacts, he obtained a fake passport issued by the Red Cross. The document read Helmut Gregor. He used that name to embark for Argentina. He departed from Genoa on a ship called the North King and docked in Buenos Aires. No one stopped him. In Argentina, he found a network of former Nazis. Some were acquaintances from before, others just shared the secret. He lived discreetly. He changed jobs several times. At first, he worked as a laborer, then he got a position at an agricultural machinery company. In 1951, he used his real name to obtain Argentine citizenship. He signed papers as Josef Mengele. No one said anything to him. Later, he started his own business. He imported machinery. He had an office and employees. He sent products to the countryside and made money. He bought a house. He traveled, went to restaurants, and went to the cinema. He used the name Mengele without hiding. He attended social events and published advertisements. No one touched him. In 1956, he traveled to Germany with an Argentine passport. The purpose was to settle family inheritance matters. He entered and exited without problems. Upon his return, the situation changed. A journalist began to ask questions. He published an article, mentioned his name, and connected him with Auschwitz. The authorities began to look into his case. Mengele disappeared again. He sold properties, closed the company, and crossed the border into Paraguay. There he obtained Paraguayan documents with his real name. The dictator Stroessner facilitated papers for those who paid. Mengele lived peacefully in a country house. No one bothered him. He visited the capital, bought things and walked in the street. In 1960, Israeli agents captured Adolf Eichmann in Buenos Aires. Mengele found out quickly. He thought they were after him. He escaped to Brazil, crossing unseen. He settled on a farm belonging to Germans sympathetic to Nazism. It was in Serra Negra, near Sao Paulo. He wasn't in public records. He didn't work formally. He lived off what his family sent him from Germany. For years, he changed houses several times, always in rural areas. He depended on a few people. They brought him food and gave him medicine. He didn't go out much. If he did, he was accompanied. In 1970, he had a mild heart attack. He was treated at home. In 1976, the Brazilian police almost found him. They searched properties linked to former Nazis, but his name didn't appear in the archives and no one asked any more questions. In 1979, he went swimming at Bertioga Beach. He went into the water and had another heart attack. He drowned. They pulled him out, but he was no longer breathing. He had no documents on him. He was buried as Wolfgang Gerhard, a name borrowed from a friend. Years later, an anonymous informant tipped them off, saying the body was Mengele's. In 1985, an international commission exhumed the remains. They compared bones with medical records and analyzed the skull. There were coincidences. In 1992, genetic tests confirmed his identity. He had spent more than 30 years without being caught. He lived in 3 countries with support networks without using disguises or changing his appearance. No one turned him in. No one seriously looked for him. This is how he moved. With real passports, false or true names, money sent from Germany, and help from former comrades. He never had to hide underground. He didn't need tunnels or bunkers, just contacts. His surname appeared in letters, accounts, and deeds. Even in Christmas greetings, everything was in plain sight, but no one cared. Walter Roth, the gas engineer who worked in Syria. After 1945, Walter Rauff vanished without a trace. The man who had designed one of the regime's simplest and most effective killing machines, the mobile gas van, blended in with the thousands of fugitives who crossed borders with fake names and the help of hidden networks. He had been part of the SS, held rank, had contacts, and knew how to disappear. As soon as the war ended, he was already planning how to never be found. During the first few post-war years, he moved around Europe, using several aliases. He didn't stay in one place for long. He was on the Allies' radar, but there was too much confusion and chaos to track him immediately. He took advantage of that. In 1948, he managed to reach Italy. There, like many other Nazis, he connected with clandestine routes that passed through convents, religious missions, and sympathetic contacts. From Genoa, he set sail for South America. His initial destination was Ecuador, but he soon ended up in Chile. In Santiago, Rauff posed as a businessman. He obtained documents, presented himself with another name, and built a life from scratch. He had the right profile, educated, quiet, meticulous. He didn't draw attention. Soon he began working in international trade. He managed contacts, negotiated with Europeans, and befriended diplomats. He had money and knew how to navigate. During the 1950s, his real name hardly appeared anywhere, except in the internal reports of secret services. In West Germany, pressure began to mount to prosecute Nazi criminals who were still at large. Rauff appeared on some lists. The Israelis also had him flagged. It was known that he was directly responsible for designing the vans where prisoners were put and asphyxiated with engine fumes. Thousands died that way. It was a portable, fast, and silent execution. He had devised the system and coordinated its use in the East, but in Chile, no one touched him. The government in power did not cooperate with extradition requests. In the mid-1960s, Rauff took another leap. He went to the Middle East. Syria welcomed him with open arms. The regime wanted him as an advisor. He had experience in counterintelligence, knew about repression, and understood well how to operate police systems without leaving a trace. In Damascus, he worked closely with the security forces. He taught techniques, trained officers, and drafted manuals. He was not a public figure. He operated from the shadows. Only the heads of the apparatus knew him. His German accent was disguised in the hallways where everyone spoke softly. During those years, he also maintained contact with other Nazi fugitives who had ended up in Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon. There were few, but they moved well. Some were in business, others in military affairs. They shared information, helped their networks, and offered connections. Rauff became a link between several groups. His technical knowledge made him valuable. He was not an ideologue, he was a man who solved problems efficiently. Meanwhile, in Europe his name was circulating again. Several investigations pointed to his whereabouts. Germany claimed him. Israel asked for explanations. Human rights organizations pressured, but Syria refused to hand him over, saying that a citizen with that name did not exist. The evidence was ignored. Ralph, for his part, continued with his work. He spoke little, wrote reports, and was careful to avoid exposure. In the 1970s, he reappeared in Chile. The political circumstances had changed. The country was now under dictatorship, and intelligence services were looking for experienced people. Ralph offered his expertise. He became an external consultant, collaborating on issues of surveillance, tracking, and eliminating opponents. He never appeared on official payrolls, but several witnesses placed him in key meetings. Some remembered him as a serious foreigner with very clear ideas on how to suppress insurgencies. Israel once again made moves. The Mossad considered an operation to capture him, similar to what they had done with Eichmann. But in this case, the conditions were more complicated. The Chilean government did not cooperate, and Ralph lived in a neighborhood where everyone knew him. He had protection. The German embassy also avoided involvement. Despite everything, journalists managed to photograph him and confronted him. He denied everything, saying he was someone else and had nothing to do with the war. International pressure increased. There were letters, editorials, and protests. The scandal grew. Finally, in the 1980s, a judicial process began in Chile to evaluate his extradition. The case got bogged down in technicalities. They argued that the crimes had expired and that Chilean law did not contemplate his prosecution. After long hearings, the tribunal rejected the request. Ralph remained free. He spent his last years in Santiago, living in a modest house. He walked around the neighborhood and shopped at local stores. Some neighbors knew who he was, others did not. They saw him as an elderly foreigner, solitary with few friends. He never spoke of his past. He died in 1984 of natural causes. There was no public ceremony or statement. Just the quiet disappearance of one of the technical minds behind the Nazi extermination. Walter Ralph had crossed half the world, worked with various regimes, and evaded all attempts at capture. From his days as an SS officer to his consultancies in Latin American dictatorships and Arab governments, he had managed to remain operational without ever being brought before a tribunal. He never expressed remorse. He never faced charges. He left as he lived, hidden, useful, and dangerous. Franz Stangl, the one who directed trains to the slaughterhouse and ended up in a prisoner's uniform. He was born in Austria in 1908 and started as a police officer. He had basic training and knew how to adapt. When the Nazis took control, he joined the party, and later he was added to the SS. In 1940, he was put into the euthanasia program. He supervised centers disguised as clinics, toured facilities, reviewed spreadsheets, and checked on personnel. The goal was to eliminate, not to care for. Everything happened under his eyes, and he signed off that it was going well. 2 years later, he was already in Poland. In 1942, he was put in charge of Sobibor. Trains arrived there without stopping, loaded with people who disembarked, and no one returned. He ensured the line moved continuously, that every movement was precisely timed. He timed everything from when the train car opened until the chambers were closed. He had a watch in his hand and numbers in his head. He didn't last long in that position. He was promoted and sent to Treblinka. It was on a different scale. More people, more often, faster. Thousands arrived daily, and his task was to keep the machine from jamming. He received schedules, figures, and orders. He coordinated shifts, organized disembarkation, and controlled the pace. Every piece had to fit. He made sure that happened. He jotted down arrivals, adjustments, and rotations on paper. His handwriting appeared in daily reports. He wasn't seen with a weapon, but everything functioned around him. The gas chambers were there, operational, but what made them move was the structure he kept alive. He was the one who maintained the mechanism. After the revolt in Treblinka, he was moved. They sent him to Italy to work with the Reich police. In 1945, with the Allies closing in, he took off his uniform and hid in Austria with false papers. From there, he went to Syria. Then, with the help of a network that smuggled Nazis, he ended up in Rome. In Genoa, he was given new documentation and embarked for Brazil. He arrived saying he was a textile technician. He settled in Sao Paulo, found work, and rented an apartment. He didn't live in hiding. He didn't reveal anything, but he also didn't conceal himself. He brought his wife and daughters. He led a normal life, sent letters, and walked around the neighborhood. In the German community, they knew who he was, but they left him alone. More than 20 years passed. He went to church, greeted neighbors, and moved between the factory and home. Meanwhile, in Europe, someone reopened his file. Documents appeared, data was cross-referenced, and witnesses identified him. In 1967, his whereabouts were discovered. Austria requested his extradition. The Brazilian police acted silently. They arrested him at his home and sent him to Düsseldorf. He was put in a cell, and they began gathering evidence. Signatures, reports, convoy lists. Survivors recognized him. They spoke of his white uniform, how he walked on the platforms, and his presence. He was located. In the trial, he admitted he had been there, that he organized things, and that orders came from above. But documents showed that nothing worked without him. He adjusted schedules, directed entries, and organized departures. He didn't need to touch anyone. He was the one who kept everything running. He was given life imprisonment and sent to a special prison. He didn't appeal. He stayed there, isolated. His wife wrote to him. He spoke little. The journalist Gitta Serini managed to interview him several times. He described how everything was set up. Schedules, flows, routines. He described it as just another job, without emotions, without deviations, without raising his voice. In 1971, his heart failed. He was taken to the prison hospital but didn't last. He died a few days later. There were no cameras, no mass, no ceremony. He was buried in Austria with his birth name without a gravestone or announcements. No one attended. He remained underground in his prisoner's uniform and no one ever spoke of him again. Gustav Wagner, the one from Sobibor who lived in Brazil. Gustav Wagner, one of the commanders at Sobibor, the extermination camp where thousands were systematically liquidated, vanished after the war. In 1945, with the Russians advancing, he shed his uniform, blended in with the fleeing masses, and launched his own escape plan. He moved through Austria, then crossed rural areas, always using different names. He never stayed long in one place. He knew how to keep moving. In 1947, he was caught in a raid and sent to a British prisoner of war camp, where he was held for several months. He claimed to be an ordinary soldier and revealed no details. Amidst the chaos of records and lacking direct evidence, he was released and walked away as if nothing had happened. In the following years, he settled in Austria. He worked as an assistant, obtained new papers, and moved in small circles. By 1950, he had already crossed into Italy. From Rome, he connected with an organized network that smuggled Nazis out of the continent. He received help from priests, contacts within refugee offices, and readily available passports. He was given one under the name Günther Mendel and used it to board a ship departing from Genoa, bound for Brazil. He arrived in Sao Paulo that same year, disembarked, and never looked back. There he began another life. Initially, he lived in rented houses, working in small factories. He didn't talk much and went unnoticed. In a short time, he had a stable job, a monthly salary, and an established routine. He used his new identity without problems, never giving any indication of his past. He avoided being photographed, steered clear of large gatherings, and changed neighborhoods when he deemed it necessary. When anyone asked about his accent, he simply said he was European. He had friends, but only a few close ones. No one truly knew him. For decades, he lived peacefully. Sometimes he traveled to other cities for work, always avoiding showing documents unless absolutely necessary. He kept his fake passport carefully hidden. In Brazilian records, he appeared as a legal resident alien. Nothing in his papers attracted attention. Some other former Nazis recognized him but kept silent. In Brazil, there was a network, not very large but active. They covered for each other, shared contacts, and helped if anyone was in trouble. Wagner was part of this network. He wasn't one of the leaders, but he was respected. In the late 1970s, lists of war criminals began to appear in European media, and his name resurfaced. He was directly linked to Sobibor. Some survivors had testified years earlier, describing him in detail: his face, his voice, what he did in the camp. In 1978, a group of Nazi hunters tracked him to Sao Paulo. They photographed him and confirmed it was him. They reported him to the Brazilian police. At first, the authorities hesitated. They checked his papers, compared signatures, and verified with embassies. It was the same person. They arrested him, took him to a police station, and interrogated him. Austria requested his extradition. The case became a media sensation. Newspapers spoke of the monster of Sobibor living in Brazil as if nothing had happened. More witnesses appeared. People who had been in the camp recognized him. They said he had supervised executions, chosen victims, and beaten those who didn't move fast enough. They showed photos and lined up to testify. Meanwhile, Wagner was in a common cell. He didn't say much, barely speaking with his lawyers. They argued that he was old, that he hadn't been in trouble for decades, and that he lived in peace. They wanted to stop the judicial process with technicalities. They relied on Brazilian laws that limited the extradition of long-term residents. They argued that since he had entered legally and had valid papers for almost 30 years, he shouldn't be sent abroad. The court took its time. They reviewed archives, consulted documents from the Austrian government, and heard testimonies. The defense filed appeals every week, and the case became entangled. Months passed, and Wagner remained imprisoned. The press continued to exert pressure, but the judicial system moved slowly. In 1979, the lead judge on the case ruled against extradition, stating that not all requirements were met. The prosecution appealed, but it was unsuccessful. He was released. He walked out just as he had the previous time. He returned to his neighborhood, to his home. Some neighbors greeted him, others avoided him. He had been through all that and was still free. The press sought him for interviews, but he refused. Sometimes he went out to buy bread. Sometimes he stayed indoors for days. He kept away from anything that smelled of the press or justice. In 1980, a German journalist found him and secretly recorded him. Wagner spoke calmly, confirming his identity. He didn't hide. He said he had been part of the system, that he was following orders. He said he had no regrets. The recording was published and another scandal erupted. But legally, nothing more could be done. The case was closed in Brazil. In 1981, the police found his body in his home. He was dead. There was blood, and a knife lay nearby. The official version was suicide. They say he stabbed himself. Some believed it, others did not. There was no trial, there was no ceremony. No one claimed the body. He was buried in an unmarked cemetery. The file was archived. That was the end of the story of the man who was one of the cruelest in Sobibor and who lived peacefully for decades until he was found. But even then, he never paid for anything. Gerhard Bohn, the euthanasia jurist who walked free. Born in Austria in 1908, Gerhard Bohn began his career as a police officer. He possessed basic training and a knack for adaptation. When the Nazis seized control, he joined the party and subsequently the SS. In 1940, he was assigned to the euthanasia program. He oversaw centers disguised as clinics, inspected facilities, reviewed forms, and checked on staff. The objective was elimination, not care. Everything transpired under his watchful eye, and he signed off on its smooth operation. He wasn't the one deciding who died, but it was his responsibility to ensure everything appeared legal. For years, he ensured the program ran unhindered. He was aware of transfers, permits, authorizations, and medical reports. There was an entire circuit that organized who went to which clinic, how deaths were reported, and which doctor signed what document. From his desk, he helped coordinate all of this. He read reports with names, ages, and diagnoses. He knew where they were going. He knew what happened inside. When the church's protests began to cause issues in 1941, the program was officially suspended. However, the killings continued under a different name and with fewer formalities. He was moved to a different position but remained within the system, working in the bureaucratic apparatus until the war ended. In 1945, with the Allies entering Germany and the Third Reich in ruins, Bohn vanished. He knew what he had done and didn't wait for questions. He spent a few months in hiding, using false documents, staying off the radar. He didn't appear in the initial arrests, nor was he mentioned in the Nuremberg trials. He blended in among the thousands escaping the chaos. In 1949, when things had calmed down, he managed to leave the country. He arrived in Argentina with new papers, finding what many other ex-Nazis found, a place where no one asked too many questions. He got a job, rented an apartment, and used a different name. In Buenos Aires, there was a well-connected German community. He moved freely within it, living without hiding, without a uniform, without a past. For years, nothing happened. In West Germany, justice focused on the big names, the commanders, the high-ranking officials. Bureaucrats weren't targeted, but in the 1960s, some investigations began to dig deeper. documents surfaced, mentioning Bone as a key figure in the legal structure of Action T4. They located him and issued an international warrant. Argentina confirmed his presence, and diplomatic pressure began. Bone was arrested in Buenos Aires in 1963. He was held in a cell for months while his situation was reviewed. Germany requested extradition. Papers travelled from one office to another. The process was slow, involving legal appeals, discussions and technical arguments. Meanwhile, he continued to claim he had nothing to do with murders, that he was just a lawyer, that he hadn't touched anyone. In 1964, after much legal wrangling, he was sent back to Germany. He was put on a plane with escorts and landed in Frankfurt, where a court awaited him. They reopened the case, reviewed his history, examined his role within the ministry, gathered the Action T4 program papers, and compared signatures. He was brought to the stand. However, the trial gradually lost momentum. The defense presented objections, disputing dates, levels of responsibility, and exact functions. They argued that he hadn't given orders to kill, that his role was merely technical, and that it couldn't be proven he knew what was happening in each clinic. They claimed it was unfair to judge a bureaucrat as if he were an executioner. The trial halted several times. Some witnesses died, while others couldn't recall details. Political pressure also played a role. In 1968, the judges suspended the case, stating there wasn't conclusive evidence to convict him. They didn't declare him innocent, but they didn't declare him guilty either. They set him free. He walked out of the courthouse without escort, without punishment, without penalty. He settled in a quiet neighborhood, had a house and drew a pension. He went to buy bread like anyone else. He died in his bed in Germany, without spending a single day in prison for everything he had signed. Gerhard Bone was one of those who shaped the crime from behind a desk. He carried no weapons, shouted no orders, and appeared in no photographs. But without people like him, the system wouldn't have functioned. He reviewed files while others opened gas valves, and when everything collapsed, he lived years away, then returned as if nothing had happened. Alois Brunner, the one who trained thugs in Syria. When the war was falling apart, Alois Brunner already knew his escape route. He had been Eichmann's right-hand man in all matters of deportations and vanished while others still believed they could defend Berlin. He had worked in Austria, France, Slovakia and Greece, and in all those places he did the same thing: move lists, organize trains, and take people from their homes to send them to camps. By 1943, he had already developed his own way of doing things, straightforward and fast, with no detours. When the Allies began to take control, he had already prepared himself. He changed papers, burned what needed burning, and blended in with the displaced. For a while, he moved through Austria as if nothing had happened. He had new documents and a network of contacts that helped him stay off the radar. The key was not to attract attention, move little, and avoid anything that could leave a trace. But as the months passed, names began to appear in Allied archives, and his soon surfaced. When he saw that things were getting serious, he left the country. He travelled south through Italy, and from there began looking for a place where no one would look for him. In Rome, he wasted no time. He knew there were offices of humanitarian organizations that, amidst such confusion, could serve as a hiding place. There he met priests who had already helped others escape. Some were German, others were simply involved in these networks for various reasons. They got him papers, processed a passport with a false name, and gave him contact details to continue his journey. The destination was the Middle East. The departure point was the port of Genoa. He boarded a ship bound for Syria. The country had no interest in collaborating with the West to search for Nazis, and it was also opening its doors to foreigners who could contribute something in terms of control, organization, or training. Brunner arrived at just the right time. When he disembarked at the port, he didn't have to hide much. He changed his name, said he was Austrian, and began to move as an administrative technician. With that, he settled in Damascus. Soon after, he had a steady job. He began to collaborate with the regime's secret services. What he essentially did was teach them how to maintain order, how to interrogate, how to manage information, and how to neutralize resistance groups. Everything he had learned during the years of the Reich, he was now recycling in another dictatorship. He didn't hide too much. He lived in an ordinary building, had neighbors, went out to shop, and walked in the street. Some recognized him, but the government covered for him. The French tried to request his extradition, but Syria played dumb. For them, Brunner was not a criminal. He was a useful foreigner. Journalists who tried to approach the topic encountered vague answers, unconfirmed reports, and official silences. Some Nazi hunters claimed he was alive, that they had seen him, that they had even spoken with him. But the Syrian authorities said they knew nothing. Even when he received letter bombs sent by Israeli services, one blew off some of his fingers and part of his sight, he remained in the same place. He didn't leave, he didn't change countries, he stayed put. During the 1970s and 1980s, his presence in Damascus was an open secret. Diplomats, intelligence agents, and journalists knew where he lived, but no one did anything. Western embassies received reports about his movements, but it went no further than that. Victims' families pressed, but achieved nothing. Declarations accumulated in archives, and judicial requests were misplaced. By the 1990s, with more international pressure, they tried to locate him again. But every time someone arrived with a lead, they encountered closed doors. The Syrians continued to neither confirm nor deny anything. Some said he was hospitalized, others that he had been transferred, others that he was already dead. The last confirmed photo of him was from the 1980s. After that, nothing. The Mossad was still after him, but without local support, they couldn't do much more. Several European media outlets tried to put together special reports, but they hit walls everywhere. It was said that he lived in a state security building, with restricted access, guarded 24 hours a day. There was also talk of identity changes, nocturnal transfers, and operations to keep him alive and away from any court. In 2001, rumors began to circulate that he had died. Some said it was from illness, others that he was eliminated to prevent him from speaking. The Syrian government never said anything official, neither confirming nor denying. Journalists who managed to reach Damascus were followed, interrogated, and then expelled. There were no new photos, no witnesses, no medical documents, only versions. In 2010, a report from a Syrian defector claimed that Brunner had died years earlier and was buried in a Damascus cemetery under another name. But there was no proof either. To this day, there is no clear date of death, no official death certificate, no tomb with his name. What is known is that he lived there for more than 4 decades, without having faced a single trial, without having spent a day in prison. He died free, protected by a regime that used him as long as he served, and then silenced him forever. When the regime collapsed and Allied troops took city after city, thousands in SS uniforms were set loose. Some threw away their clothes, shaved their heads, and blended in with civilians. Others already had marked routes, ready documents, and secure contacts. They crossed borders, changed names, and posed as whatever was necessary. Several managed to sneak in among refugees or wounded soldiers. Some stayed in Germany or Austria, settled in small towns, and built a life without leaving the map. Others fled to countries where no one asked questions: South America, Syria, Egypt, Spain. Some with religious help, others thanks to former comrades. Many were caught from the beginning. They were interrogated, imprisoned, some tried, others released for lack of evidence. A few ended up in Nuremberg. Others kept silent and camouflaged themselves. Some became neighborhood doctors, consulate employees, or security advisors. They lived for decades without anyone touching them. There were those who got involved in coups, trained secret police, and moved networks with the same hands but different suits. Meanwhile, names accumulated. Prosecutors reviewed archives, journalists searched for clues, and survivors recognized faces. Some were found in airports, homes, clinics, or family parties. There were those with public trials, shouting, and witnesses. Others died before receiving an order. Some were given life sentences, others lesser penalties. Several ended up in common prisons, others in private hospitals. Most never even saw a cell. Some were protected, others knew how to hide. Graves with false names appeared, fake certificates. Some were declared dead and were still alive. Others vanished without leaving a single photo. In countries where no one interfered, they lived as if nothing had happened. Some with the support of authorities, others with the silence of neighbors. All came from the same place. They started as escorts, became an armed wing, and ended up within an extermination system that functioned like an assembly line. Each one played a role, but all answered to the same command. Many said they were just obeying. There were fanatics, opportunists, technicians, sadists. They were there, and they continued, with another name, other clothes, other papers. Some appeared on television, others never in a photo. More than 80 years have passed since everything fell apart. There are still open files, unidentified graves, and loose documents. Names and remains continue to be found. But for everyone that appears, there is another that never did. Some are buried with the wrong name. Others left children without anyone knowing who they were. Few were judged. Many lived peacefully. And the lost are countless. How many more erased themselves without leaving anything? How many lived well, without trial, without conviction, without anyone saying a single word to them?